So here we are before Pilate. Jesus by this time has had no sleep. He's been mocked. He's been abused. He's been punched, slapped, spat upon. He's been lied to, not just by his own friends, but by the Jewish leaders who knew the law, and they broke the law. They misquoted him. They even made up stories. They weren't there for the truth. They were there to get rid of Jesus. He was a threat to their agenda, and they need to get rid of him. Peter denies him. Judas betrays him. He's already got the world on his shoulders. He's had no sleep. And he's already experienced the worst of it, of the suffering. Do you know what the passion of Christ is about? The passion of Christ, it means suffering. But Jesus is understood to have experienced all forms of suffering in these 24 hours, less than 24 hours. Remember, the pain he experienced the night before was so severe he nearly died from that alone. He experienced the mental and the emotional pain and the betrayal of his own friends. And the worst of it, he knew what he was about to go into, and we were not going to appreciate it. That was the worst of it. So here we are, Good Friday morning, very early in the morning, and it says, I've just had a fresh reread of all four Gospels. The synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they describe it that all of them, all the leaders, come chaining Jesus as a criminal, one of the worst, like chaining him hands, feet. Imagine the thing, heavy chains, as if he's like a dangerous man. So it looks worse than it actually is. And they take him before Pilate. Pilate is a citizen of Rome, right? Caesar. And all these Jewish leaders are coming to condemn Jesus to death. Now he's already been found guilty in their little illegal gathering. And now it's time for Rome to speak. They take him to Pilate. Pilate is like, okay, what has he done? And they said, he claims to be Christ. Now, what on earth does that mean to Pilate? Pilate's a Roman citizen. He's not a religious man, not following their religion anyway. So he doesn't believe in Yahweh. He doesn't believe in their God. He doesn't believe in any of the Jewish traditions. So what on earth could they say to him to convince him to kill this man? If Jesus claimed to be God, Pilate doesn't care. If Jesus blasphemed, Pilate doesn't care. So they have to convince Pilate, and they double down 3 times. On the third point is where they get him. He's an enemy of Caesar. He claims to be king, and we have no other king than Caesar. Excuse me, Jewish leaders, you have been publicly renouncing Caesar. You don't follow Caesar yourself. You probably hate him more than anything. Now you're lying again to condemn Jesus to death. Do you see the irony here? Now Pilate's like, I see no guilt in this man. And he wants to wiggle out of it. And he's like, I don't want anything to do with this. And he sends Jesus to Herod. He figures out that Herod's overseeing a jurisdiction that's outside of Pilate's area. And he says, go to Herod. Now they take Jesus to Herod. And Herod wanted to see this man. But what was Herod looking for? He was looking for the signs, the miracles. He heard of this miracle worker. And so Herod, and you can imagine the scene, he's got people all around. It's almost like a party scene. He's probably half drunk anyway. He's always doing no good. And he says, you're the one that can do a sign. Do me a sign. Can you perform a sign? Do something for us. Entertain us. What does Jesus say? Nothing. Come on. Is it true? Like you can actually destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? How are you going to do that? Show us what you can do. Does Jesus say anything? Nothing. Come on. We know, we've heard the stories. You can do it. Show us a sign. Show us some of your magic. Jesus says, nothing. He then sends him back. He says, take him out of here. This man can't do anything. Do not put pearl before, swine. Jesus is not going to waste a breath on him. He goes back to Pilate. And now I'll probably be mixing up all the Gospels here to try and get some sort of chronological order here. So they go back to Pilate. Pilate's been warned by his wife. She's had this dream that Jesus of Nazareth, this Jesus is a man of God. Do not harm him. Do not harm him. So Pilate hasn't got a plan to harm him. He doesn't want to arrest him. He still doesn't think he's guilty. He doesn't care less about this man, but he just wants to make the peace. So now they come back, and now they double down, these Jewish leaders. And they say, this man claims to be king. We have no other king but Caesar. Big fat lie. This is Old Testament stuff now. The Jewish people, they know that who is their true king. It's supposed to be Yahweh, God. God told them that in Kings 1. They doubled down. They wanted a king, and God allowed them to have a king. But God told them that, remember, the true king is me. God is king. So when they now accuse Jesus of claiming to be king, and we have no other king but Caesar, they are lying through their teeth. Do you see what they're doing? These are our religious leaders at the time. So Pilate is like, okay, I better talk to him. So he takes Jesus in, and he says, so are you a king? Jesus doesn't speak. Come on, is it true they claim that you're a king? And Jesus says, you have said so. And then if you read John, Jesus will go on and say, my kingdom is not of this world, it's of the next. And Pilate, and he says, I've come to bear witness to the truth. Then Pilate then says, truth. What is truth? Now, what is Pilate saying here? Pilate doesn't believe in objective truth here. He knows that the Jewish people believe in their truth. The Romans have their truth. Different gods, different perspectives. Which one's true? For him, what is truth? At this point, the question is also for the reader. What is truth? Jesus says, I've come to give witness to the truth. Jesus is truth itself. And Pilate is asking, what is truth? Well, Pilate, just a little clue, you are facing him right now. That's truth right in front of you. But he's asking the question, probably also mocking. I don't believe in this truth. What's true for me is my truth. What's true for you is your truth. Moral relativism. Have you heard of people that say that? You have your truth, I have my truth. And this is the very question. So we've got to get to the bottom of that question. Is there such thing as truth, period? Is there such thing? If anyone tells you, I don't believe in absolute truth, I believe in my truth, I believe everyone has their own truths, what you've got to ask them back is, how do I know what you're saying is true? Do you see what I just did? Because the moment you take the rug under their feet and you deny there's actually objective truth, you've got no foundation whatsoever to build on. How on earth can you build on that statement, what's true for you is true for you, what's true for me is true for me? Truth isn't something you just make up. Truth is truth. I'm either holding a book in my hand or I'm not. This is, you might think of it in something else, you might twist the truth. It's a book. We are in a Catholic church. That's the truth. So we've got to be careful not to start warping the truth. And Pilate, unfortunately, doesn't know what the truth is. So now Pilate goes back out and he says, he still doesn't see any guilt in Jesus. He wants to send him away. And they say, He has broken the law of Caesar. He is no friend of Caesar, and anyone who lets him go will be no friend of Caesar. Meaning what? Pilate, you're going to be no friend to Caesar. You're going to be in trouble, Pilate, if you do nothing. You better do something, Pilate. Otherwise, you're going to be against Caesar, and we're going to make sure that you will be punished. Now, Pilate is threatened. Did you see what they did? They threatened Pilate. So now Pilate has to do something. Now, depending on which order you go, the first three Gospels will have Jesus condemned to death. So the scourging takes place and then immediately the carrying of the cross. But in John, what's interesting is he gets him scourged and then they come back. So let me just go down that route for now. So Pilate doesn't want to crucify him yet. So he said, let me do something. Get him scourged. Now, from the Jewish perspective, what sort of punishment is this? Typically, you get 40 lashes for a criminal, and it's with rods. You know, just like a branch, rod, flexible rod. And you lash on the back 40 times. Remember that number 40, by the way, from first lesson? So you lash 40 times, and that should have been it. But this is now Roman scourging, and they actually have got a lot of experience with scourging, where they've timed it. They know how many scourges it takes to knock a man down. They went so severe on Jesus, they went above and beyond. They nearly killed him just from the scourging. And just to understand what type of materials they used, it wasn't a whip, it wasn't a rod. Imagine like a chain with animal bones and teeth, metals, sharp objects, you name it. So when you scourge someone, it actually enters into their flesh. And when you rip it out, it's tearing that flesh off. Every blow that Jesus experienced, he lost a chunk of flesh. It's very hard to comprehend. He nearly died. If you've seen the movie The Passion of Christ, and you know, it's a very hard scene to watch, that scourging scene. Have we all seen it? It's probably even hard for the little ones, but if you watch that, it's hard for us to watch, let alone talk about, let alone try and meditate on, let alone go through. But this is what our Lord went through. He nearly died from the scourging. And yeah, they've got it correct. He wasn't just scourged from the back. Head to toe. Back and front. They measure based on the Shroud of Turin. So if you study the Shroud of Turin, the burial cloth of Jesus, and they look at all the blows that this man experienced in the shroud, top to bottom, and they've counted all the different lashes, all the different cuts, all the different scourges, it is somewhere between 300 and 400 scourges. He should have died. That's about almost 10 times the amount he should have got. Can you just let that sink in? They bring him back. Now, also, along the way, they said, okay, they blindfolded him. And they said, prophesy now, prophet. And they started to spit on him. Who spat on you, prophet? Punch him. Who hit you, prophet? If that wasn't enough, the scourging, they then say, hang on, this is not just a prophet. He's claimed to be king. Let's make a crown for our king. And then they get the crown of thorns. They get this thorn bush. We saw how sharp they were. We're talking 10 centimeters each thorn. 3 inches, whatever that turns into, about 10 centimeters. A crown of thorns pressed into his head. Again, 10 centimeters. And then in the Gospel of Mark, it says they struck him on the head, like with the crown on, piercing his skull. He should have died from that. That would have caused so much damage. Hail, King of the Jews. Hail, King of the Jews. Mocking him. They're actually The irony is he actually is the King of the Jews. He's the King of the universe. He's the King of kings. And here they are mocking him. And they put on him a purple cloak. Now he's already bleeding. Putting on this cloak, it's sticking to his body. Crown of thorns. Then they take him back to Pilate, according to John. Pilate sees what they've done, thinking, I didn't ask you to kill him, just to treat him, just to do something. And he even says, behold the man. It's to show, look what you've done to him. He barely can be recognized. He can barely stand up. Is this what you wanted? Like, what on earth is his crime to deserve this? Pilate himself couldn't even handle looking at Jesus. And they now double down and say, crucify him. And he's like, who are you people? He even is talking to Jesus in John, and he's saying, I have the power to crucify you or release you. Now he wants to release him. Now Pilate has one last idea to save this Jesus. To Pilate, he's innocent. He's done nothing wrong. I've got an idea. Every year I release a criminal. Let me get the very worst one I could find. A murderer, this thief, Barabbas. And he brings out Barabbas and he brings out Jesus. Jesus is dressed in a robe, pouring sweat, barely can stand. Behold the man. Here is Barabbas, the worst criminal you can think of. Which one do you want me to release? And we hear the crowd shouting, release Barabbas, release Barabbas, release Barabbas, crucify Jesus. Pilate can't believe his ears. Barabbas is now set free. Jesus is the innocent one, and he's now condemned to death. Not any death, Roman crucifixion. He's already gone through a lot, and now he's got to carry this cross up Mount Calvary, be nailed to that cross before everyone. Crucify him. Pilate now washes his hands. You know what's funny about this scene? Pilate thinks he's separating himself from this charge. So he's the one that will condemn him to death. They have to ultimately listen to Pilate. Pilate washes his hands. I'm washing my hands from this. And now he gets crucified. Hold that thought. Back to Barabbas. That makes you angry a little bit, doesn't it? That the criminal gets set free and the innocent one is the one that gets condemned. And we're not talking about any innocent man. We're talking about the most innocent that has ever existed. And just when you think, okay, that's not fair, think for a moment what the name Barabbas means. You've heard in the Gospels, you would have heard earlier, where Jesus will ask the apostles, who do people say that I am? And then Simon will say, you are the Christ. And then he says to Simon, blessed are you, Simon. And then, interesting, it's not an English word, it says Bar Jonah. Simon Bar Jonah. Have you ever wondered, hang on, what does Bar Jonah mean? It's an Aramaic word for son. Simon, son of Jonah, or Simon, son of John. So hold that thought, son. So Bar is son. Now you know how to say father in Aramaic? Abba or Abba. So let's unite those two words. Bar, Abba, Barabbas. Barabbas, his name means Barabbas, which means son of the Father. Barabbas is you and me in this story, in this scene. We are Barabbas. We are the guilty ones. We are the ones that should be condemned to death. Yet Jesus takes on that guilt on himself, and he saves us and he sets us free, and he will take the punishment on himself. This is the God we worship. He willingly did this. He wasn't tricked. He wasn't murdered in the way you think. He laid down his life. He's in control here, believe it or not. Jesus is the one asking questions last week, if you remember. Jesus is the one with the authority. Even though it looks like they're murdering him, he's the one that's going through all of this because he knows what his mission is. So now Barabbas is set free, Jesus is condemned to death. What's left to go? The carrying of this cross, the nailing to the cross, the stripping of his cloak, and the lifting up for the world to see. We're going to go through pretty much the stations in detail next week. But bring it back. Pilate, he thought he washed his hands from this, right? He thought, I'm off scot-free. I didn't condemn him to death, they did. I've washed my hands. What do we say in the creed? And we should be saying it every day. What do we say? He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Not just the people of the time, but all followers of Jesus since that day will say Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Not crucified under the Sanhedrin or Caiaphas, crucified under Pontius Pilate. So as much as Pilate tried to skip and get away from this, he's implanted right in the creed that we say every day. And billions and billions and billions of Christians around the world over this last 2,000 years have said the creed. And so you might think you want to hide. You might think you want to sweep your sins under the carpet. You might think no one's watching, so I just got away with it. God is always watching. And justice always happens. But we are called not just to justice, but to love. And that means whatever it takes to love God, we go above and beyond. And that means we don't just do things in front of people. We do the best we can in the quiet of our own privacy. God is watching all the time. And God, He will never forget a sin unless it's confessed and you said sorry. The moment you've said sorry, that sin is forgotten. I love this. When you think about this, remember lots of different apparitions, but let me think of Saint Faustina, who had to tell her bishop that Jesus is appearing to me. And the bishop said, as a test, I want you to ask Jesus next time what I confessed in the confessional last time. And so she said, okay. So she goes to the bishop, to Jesus. The bishop's asking me what he confessed last time. And Jesus says, I don't remember. This is the point. If you are truly sorry and you have been forgiven, it is gone. You are set free. It's because Jesus, like he did for Barabbas, set Barabbas free, he has now set us free. He's taken on himself the punishment. So we are now set free. And we don't have to go and actually kill a real animal and get a knife and drain and do all that anymore. That stops. Jesus is the last of the animal sacrifices. He's now takes on that sacrifice on himself. He will be the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And so there'll be no more bloody sacrifice. What we will be doing is the unbloody sacrifice, which is the offering of Jesus to the Father. I'll unpack that more on the last session. So here we are, Good Friday. It's still morning of Good Friday. He's now condemned to death. And we're going to dive in next week through the Passion of Christ. Now, this is what I love about our faith. We, in our liturgy and in Lent, on Good Fridays, on all these things, we are reliving the passion. It's not something that happened 2,000 years. We've forgotten about it. We say thank you. And then we look at a crucifix and we just say, that's a nice piece of jewelry. I love your cross. It's a really nice cross. And we just put it hanging on the windscreen, or we'll put it, I don't know, on a wall in our house. And we just say, isn't that a beautiful crucifix? To be honest, if we understood what it actually looks like if you, it's prudent to make it look a little bit more cleaner, and he's covered. But if we knew the reality, he's got blood everywhere. You couldn't even look at Jesus, how much he's gone through. So a crucifix, the beauty of it is the love it shows, but it's not really beautiful to watch. It's probably the most hardest thing you can see, put it that way. And Jesus was stripped of his clothes to nothing. And to see that in the early church, Christians were mocked because we believed in a crucified God. So the Romans couldn't understand, or even the Gentiles at the time, you guys seem to focus on this crucified God. What sort of God is crucified? But little do they know how the story ends, the resurrection. And that's what I love about our faith. We are given hope. So even if you're going to journey through the stations, journey through the carrying of the cross this week and next week, just know that the end is good. But right now, relive it. And if you relive and journey through the cross, you're going to grow from this in ways you won't even know. It's going to be different for all of us. But the growth that's going to come from this spiritually, and the way you're going to look at life, and the way we're going to count our blessings, and the way we're going to appreciate what God did for us, and any little bits of suffering we'll probably not complain about anymore. Any little splinter would be nothing when you consider what he had with the thorns and what he's about to go through with the carrying of that cross. It all goes away. So enter into it, and this will transform the way you look at life as we know it. That's how much he loved us. So remember, you are set free. We are Barabbas. Pilate thought he washed himself and got away with it. Unfortunately, we keep saying his name every day. And now we need to journey with Jesus all the way to the cross. And now, anytime we suffer, unite that pain and suffering with him. Sound good? It's not easy, but this is what love demands. And this is what's going to give us freedom. So there's a bit more homework this week. Homework this week, you've got to read now or be familiar with the episode from when Jesus starts to carry the cross, and pick up all the details. We're going to learn about Simon of Cyrene. You actually don't read about Veronica in the Gospels, but she's part of the traditional stations. So yes, there's Veronica's veil, but bit of homework if you want to find out where that comes from. I'll see if I can bring that up next week. There is Jesus falling down and all that. So we're going to be all the way to when he's on the cross. That's what next week's going to be. And the last week is going to be the last 3 hours. So the 7 last sayings of Jesus. And that's probably, it all comes a big loop back to there. That's going to sort of finish this whole episode, and you'll see how much that means to our faith, what Jesus went through, and that he was deliberate again in what he said on the cross. So there's 2 more weeks. I'm hoping we're starting to understand and appreciate how much Jesus went through, and to spend more time on this. You could do a 1-hour talk and it just doesn't do it justice, but letting it stretch over 5 weeks, hopefully we really understand the gravity of what he did, because this transformed the world. Next week, I don't want to give too much away now, but look into there's a lot of different theories, how Jesus was nailed, what cross he was carrying, all that sort of stuff. That's going to be interesting. And now with the crown of thorns, just a fun fact, some see the crown of thorns like this, just around like a bar. Some see it as a full crown. And we understand the one I saw has a full crown covering his whole head, pressing in. And again, the thorns are literally this super sharp. I think we tried to touch it. Oh, there's a book. Oh, look at that. We went. There's a sample of the bush, the crown of thorns, and they're like 15 centimeters long. Yeah. You would die just from that.
I don't know if it's say Catherine Emmerich, I'm not sure, but one of the visionaries, one of the thorns were actually through one of his eyeballs, like it actually went through his eye, like the back of his eye as well.
Yeah, there is a talk, it hit his brow, and then it blinded him.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because it covered right his whole forehead, right there. Yeah. Next time you have a headache, think about that.